This is Dragon 9. So, did I know this?
Oh, if you consume?
Yep.
Okay. So, how do you know this?
I don't know. But you could assume, Julie?
Yep.
Okay.
See? If you consume, Julie.
I know, definitely. So, do you use spoons before?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
Well, if you consume, Julie?
Yep.
Right, so, if I consume?
Yep.
Right, did I realize that?
Yep.
Okay. If I consume, Julie? Because I didn't know this. So, if you consume?
Yep.
Right, so, if you consume, Julie?
Yep.
Right, if you consume?
Yep.
Right,
So, Eve, you consume, Julie?
yep.
Okay.
Because you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right,
So, Eve, you consume?
yep.
Right, did I realize that?
Of course. Because I said so originally.
I know why. So, if you consume?
Yep. If I consume usually.
Of course.
You have no idea, right?
Well, it might be.
Yep. Because I said so originally.
Of course.
So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Why? If you consume usually?
Yep.
Right. So, if you consume?
Yep.
Right. Did I realize that?
Of course.
You have no idea. If you consume?
Yep.
Right. Okay, so, you didn't know this?
Nope, because if you consume, Julie?
Yep. Because if you didn't know this, definitely. So, you consume?
Yep.
Okay, you've said so, Julie. Alright then. Wow.
I have no idea if I consume, Julie.
So, did I use spoons before?
No, not yet. Definitely. So, you consume?
Yes?
Okay. Well, if I consume, Julie.
Of course.
So, did I use spoons before?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. So, you did know this? Nope. Right. If I consume, Julie.
Of course. So, you didn't know this?
Nope. If I consume. Cause I did know this. Definitely. If I consume, Julie.
Of course.
I know.
So, you have no idea, right?
Yep. If I consume, Julie.
Of course. You have no idea.
I know. If I consume, Julie. Because I did know this. If I consume, Julie.
Okay.
Cause you didn't know this. If you consume.
Right, yeah. Did I realize that?
Yep. If I consume, Julie. Of course. You have no idea, right? Well, if you consume? Yep. Because I didn't know this, definitely. So, do you spoons before? Nope, not yet. But you consume visually. Of course. I know. Definitely. So, if you consume? Yep. Okay. So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. If I consume visually.
Of course.
So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. So, if you consume visually.
Did we know that, definitely?
Of course.
So, you didn't know this?
Nope. But you consume visually.
Of course.
So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. If you consume visually, but I didn't know this, definitely. I was gonna spoon stop before, eventually.
So, do I realize that?
Yep. If I consume visually, but I didn't know this, definitely.
Of course.
I know why. If I consume visually, of course, you have no idea why.
Well, if you consume?
Yep,
Right, yeah. Did I realize that?
of course. So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. Did I realize that?
Yep.
Okay. So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. If I consume visually. So, if you consume?
Yep.
Right. Did I realize that?
Of course.
So, if you consume visually?
Yep.
Right. Well, if you consume visually, because I didn't know this.
So, if you consume?
Yep,
Right.
because you didn't know this.
Of course.
You have no idea.
I know. So you consume?
Yep,
Right, yeah. Did I realize that?
of course. You have no idea visually. If I consume, definitely. But you didn't know this visually. If I consume, oh, okay. I put some before, definitely.
Alright then. You said so.
Okay. Alright. Never spoon stopped before visually.
I know. So, if you consume?
Yep. So, did I spoons before?
Nope.
Okay.
So, you said so?
Right, you didn't know this. So, you consume?
Yep.
Okay.
So, did I spoons before?
No, not yet. But I realized that definitely.
Of course. So, you didn't know this?
Nope.
Right. So, if you consume usually?
Yep,
Right. Did I realize that?
of course.
Yep, no, yeah. So, if you consume?
Yep,
Freya. Did I realize that?
of course.
You have no idea, right?
Well, if you consume?
Yep,
Right.
because you didn't know this. So, if you consume Julie?
Yep,
Freya.
if you consume, Julie.
I know. So you consume?
Yep.
Right. I didn't know this, definitely.
Well, if you consume, Julie.
I know, right? Well, if you consume?
Yep.
Right. Did I realize that?
Of course. Well, if you consume?
Yep. If I consume, Julie.
Of course. I know, right?
Yep. So, if you consume?
Yep.
I didn't know this. If you consume? Of course.
If you consume, Julie.
I know, right?